What is this trash?
My mother-in-law shouted angrily as she grabbed the pot with both hands and lifted it. It was beef stew, the favorite dish of my in-laws, which I had prepared to celebrate their wedding anniversary. As I was about to bring it to the living room, my mother-in-law picked up the pot and tipped it over into the sink. The stew splashed noisily, chunks of meat, vegetables, and mushrooms falling out with a wet thud. In the rush, it all washed down into the drain, getting caught in the strainer, and I could see it happening in slow motion. While I stood there in shock, my mother-in-law gave me a cruel grin.
I would rather eat livestock feed than eat this garbage.
My name is Emma. I'm a 36-year-old who loves cooking. I've been married to my husband Ken for 12 years. When I say my hobby is cooking, I've often been teased for trying to catch a man. But I've been in charge of cooking at home since I was a student, and I genuinely enjoy it. I can cook Italian and French dishes. And of course, when it comes to Japanese dishes, I always start by making the broth from scratch. It's only natural to use different broths depending on the dish. I also run my own recipe blog, which gets a decent amount of traffic. People sometimes say I'm easygoing or a bit scatterbrained, but I've never made a mistake in cooking. I first met Ken in a cooking class. After realizing the limits of practicing home cooking on my own, I decided to attend a class after settling into my job. My goal was to acquire new skills and challenge myself with dishes I hadn't tried before. Ken joined the class a little after I did. He'd never really had a hobby before, but living alone and needing to cook for himself, he decided to join the class on a whim. Whenever he mentioned it at work, people would tease him saying, "Make something for us." Since Ken was the only young man in the cooking class, he was naturally quite popular there. The older ladies doted on him as if he were their son, but I think many women around my age had their eyes on him as well. The reason I was able to grow closer to him in such a situation was simply because we happened to take the same train home and lived near each other. Having more time to talk allowed us to get to know each other better. And before we knew it, we were drawn to each other. Ken's demeanor outside of class was just as earnest as it was during the cooking lessons. He was serious, attentive, and considerate, with a gentle manner that made him easy to talk to. Ken avoided overtime and weekend shifts to make time for his cooking hobby, whether at home or attending classes. Because of this, he didn't appear very ambitious about advancing in his career, which was a slight flaw. However, since I was also working, I didn't see it as a problem. And so, after dating for a while, we naturally progressed to getting married. For our new home, we decided to live apart from both his parents and mine, choosing to live just the two of us. My parents instantly liked Ken for his serious and polite demeanor and were genuinely happy about our marriage. My father-in-law, George, also readily approved of our marriage.
I can't believe even someone this unmanly managed to get a wife.
It was probably unusual for George's generation for a man to have cooking as a hobby. Amidst his slightly awkward words, he bowed to me and asked me to take good care of his son. Now, the real issue was with his mother, Martha.
Studying cooking, huh? Was my cooking not good enough for you?
She criticizes Ken and makes snide remarks toward me as well.
Just because you've taken a few classes doesn't mean you can call yourself a cook. Cooking is about daily effort and love. Honestly, young people these days don't know a thing.
Was it that her pride as a longtime homemaker was hurt by the cooking classes, or was it jealousy toward me being younger? She narrowed her eyes behind her glasses in distaste as she said those words.
I'm not going to stop the marriage. I do want to see my grandchild's face after all. We're still healthy and managing fine, so we won't ask you to live with us. Do as you please.
Then she turned away dismissively. Even so, with the approval of both families, we moved into our new home without any major issues and submitted our marriage certificate. At the wedding, Martha looked displeased but didn't say anything unpleasant at the event itself. Actually, she barely said anything at all. Planning the wedding was quite challenging, but Ken and I worked together and started our married life without any major conflicts. Ken continued cooking, and we would take turns preparing meals depending on who had time. I was skilled at Japanese cuisine, while my husband excelled at Italian and Chinese dishes. Ken loved the simmered dishes and tempura I made, while I adored the pasta and spring rolls he cooked. Even in those peaceful days, I was secretly enduring ongoing harassment from Martha. If I sent souvenirs from a trip, she would call me directly to criticize them.
Your taste in souvenirs is awful. I didn't think I'd end up with such a tacky daughter-in-law. Honestly, how were you even raised by your parents?
For the record, the souvenirs were typical specialty items from the area, and Ken had helped me pick them out. Later, when Ken called to check if the package had arrived and mentioned that we'd chosen the items together, her tone changed completely. Sometime after that, it happened when Martha was invited over for a meal because she mentioned being nearby. Ken had been eager to showcase the results of his cooking classes to his mother, but he found out he'd have to work late due to unexpected overtime and wouldn't be home until much later. When Ken called his mother to suggest postponing, she dismissed the idea, saying there would be plenty of chances for him to cook for her in the future. Instead, she insisted that we go ahead and prepare the meal ourselves this time. So, as planned, we invited Martha over, but she entered the house without so much as a greeting. Ignoring my attempt to guide her to the living room, she started opening nearby doors on her own and criticizing everything she saw, saying this was wrong and that was unacceptable. Shocked by how rude she was, I firmly tried to stop Martha, but she yelled back at me in a voice more than twice as loud as mine.
When I was young, such sloppy housekeeping would never have been acceptable. I can't believe this. This is exactly why young people today, all you seem to learn is how to cut corners. Do you even have any real-life skills?
Sigh.
I don't know much about your cooking classes or whatever, but housework isn't just about cooking. You have absolutely no sense of responsibility as a wife.
Thinking it wouldn't help to argue, I apologized sincerely on the spot. That said, it's not as if I'm not doing any housework at all. Since we were having a guest, Ken and I had thoroughly cleaned and tidied up the house together. I don't want to be told by someone who barges in and looks at the bathroom and closet as without asking. My mood was definitely dampened, but Ken had been looking forward to having dinner with Martha, so I decided to endure it for his sake. Afterward, I asked Martha to wait in the living room while I finished preparing the aquapazza. Sensing what I was doing, she silently crept over and grabbed the tasting plate right out of my hands. Taking a bite, she immediately spat it out into the sink along with her saliva.
This is awful. The worst thing I've ever tasted in my life.
She wiped her mouth roughly, raised her eyebrows, and glared at me.
Are you feeding my son this kind of stuff?
Stunned by her furious outburst, I couldn't say a word as Martha continued grumbling about how the flavor was too strong or how it wasn't soaked in properly. Then, she tipped the entire pot of aquapazza into the sink. Hey! Without thinking, I grabbed her arm, but she angrily pulled away, looking deeply offended.
How dare you feed my son this garbage? I won't allow it. I'll redo it myself. You can clean up this sink.
I couldn't say anything in response. After all, I had made this exact recipe countless times before. Ken always said it was delicious, and when I tasted it earlier, it was just the same as always. I didn't think I had made a huge mistake this time or that the seasoning was too strong. I just wanted to make something delicious and enjoy the meal together with the three of us. But being told it was garbage and having it ruined right in front of me left my heart feeling just as crushed. In silence, I began cleaning up. The sink was clogged from the entire fish for 3 people being thrown away, and the water wasn't draining properly. Even though I had a strainer in place, I didn't want the scraps to slip through and clog the pipes further. Later, though it was later than planned, Ken finally came home. Seeing the dishes on the table, he tilted his head curiously.
Is all the food today made by Mom?
At his words, I braced myself, fearing Martha would say something terrible in front of Ken. But to my surprise, she was smiling brighter than ever.
That's right. Isn't it nice for a change? I know your tastes better than anyone.
Martha said this with a smile as we ate her food, and I began washing the dishes. While she was so kind in front of Ken, the moment he stepped away to the restroom, she crept over to me, glaring daggers. I wondered what I should do next, but Martha left soon after. She happily enjoyed post-dinner coffee with Ken and me, then left in high spirits after he saw her off. I turned to Ken after he returned to the room, ready to spill everything that had happened earlier. But what came out of my mouth was something entirely different. Hey, do you think my cooking is too salty?
I don't think so at all. Oh, were you wondering because today's food was pretty mild? Mom really likes things on the bland side, so it might feel a bit underwhelming for us. But honestly, I've never felt like your cooking was too salty.
His words gave me a sense of relief. I felt reassured that there was nothing wrong with my sense of taste, but I couldn't stop worrying about my relationship with Martha. No matter how much she disliked a dish, I couldn't imagine wanting to get along with someone who would throw out food another person had worked hard to make. Fortunately, since then, there haven't been any more dinner gatherings involving Martha. Ken's promotion and increasingly busy work schedule were the main reasons for that. Time flew by, and we were blessed with a child. Everything progressed smoothly, and I went on maternity leave to prepare for motherhood. It seems Ken was the one who contacted Martha, and he said this.
She seemed really happy about becoming a grandmother.
It seemed her earlier statement about wanting to see her grandchildren had been genuine. Thankfully, she didn't do anything spiteful that could have caused stress during my pregnancy.
When are you going to have kids?
Considering how often Martha used to make these pointed comments, I felt relieved knowing that such remarks would finally stop. However, that didn't mean there weren't still unpleasant things to deal with. It happened on a day when I was on the phone with George about something. After we talked about our recent updates, George began to share how Martha had been doing.
Our neighborhood is mostly made up of families around our age, but none of them have grandchildren. These days, I think that sort of thing is up to personal choice, you know? But Martha seems so thrilled about having a grandchild that she's been going around bragging to the neighbors about it.
Is that so?
I keep telling her to stop, but she seems to be enjoying herself. I just hope the neighbors aren't upset by it. Sorry for burdening you with my complaints.
Oh no, not at all. It seems Martha has been bragging to everyone around her about her grandchild in a way that feels almost like showing off. George, being a sensible person, seemed concerned about her behavior. All I could do was hope there wouldn't be any trouble when we visited their home. Time passed, and we were blessed with a healthy baby girl. We named her Jessica. She grew up healthy without any major illnesses, and by the time she was old enough to understand things, she started showing interest in the cooking that Ken and I were so passionate about. I had her help with simple tasks, like making salads that didn't involve using knives or making snacks together. Every time, she looked like she was having so much fun. Cooking with my beloved daughter, doing something I love. For me, those were incredibly happy moments.
Mommy, I'm going to make flour cookies.
Watching my little daughter intently pressing cookie cutters into dough, her hands and clothes covered in flour, filled me with such love that it made me forget all the unpleasant memories, even those involving Martha. After that, my daughter and I made all kinds of dishes together. I had her stir fry in a frying pan and flip fish. As she grew a bit older, I had her help with cutting vegetables. By the time she started elementary school, she could make soup on her own, as long as I was carefully supervising. Ken was amazed at how quickly our daughter's cooking skills were improving.
I can't believe Jessica can make such delicious soup at just 6 years old. She's a genius.
Hearing the praise, Jessica grinned and said,
I'll be better than Mommy in no time.
Oh, I can't wait to see that.
Next time, I'm going to make a cake with Mommy.
Conversations like these filled our home with peace and joy. We never expected her to inherit our love for cooking to this extent, and her enthusiasm truly surprised us. When Jessica started elementary school, her ability to cook made her stand out among her classmates. She often delighted her friends by giving them homemade treats for their birthdays. I wonder what kind of person she will become in the future. She might continue cooking and turn it into a career. The thought is very exciting. Of course, she might choose a different path someday. Even if that happens, I hope she can keep her bright smile and live a happy, fulfilling life. As for me, I've continued to refine my cooking skills. The cooking blog I've been maintaining for years now ranks among the top on the blog site. Now that Jessica had started elementary school, I began thinking it might be time to try posting videos on a platform. That happy life continued for several more years. Although Martha, who had harassed me in the past, still occasionally made snide remarks even after Jessica was born, she never went so far as to involve Ken or try to turn him against me. Not wanting to trouble Ken, I chose to stay silent, which allowed us to maintain the appearance of peace. The year Jessica turned 10, we heard that my in-laws wanted to celebrate their wedding anniversary, so our family decided to join in the celebration. They don't celebrate their wedding anniversary every year, but since this marked their 40th milestone, they wanted to make it a bit more special. The two of them were planning to come to our house for dinner in a celebration. The unpleasant memory of having my cooking thrown away crossed my mind, but I felt reassured that with George and Ken nearby this time, Martha wouldn't dare to do anything so blatant. Martha, despite everything, was indulgent when it came to her granddaughter Jessica, and Jessica was excited about her grandparents' visit.
Mommy, when are Grandpa and Grandma coming? When are they coming?
Very soon. She asked this every few minutes, so I eventually started answering her with a laugh. When her grandparents arrived, Jessica was the first to greet them at the door, rushing to hug them both.
My Jessica, you've grown so much.
She's going to outgrow us in no time.
With smiles and narrowed eyes, they patted Jessica on the head. Ken and I quickly joined the greetings, and I made a point to guide them both politely. Ken and George had something personal to discuss, so I escorted Martha to the living room first. The meal was already prepared. Freshly baked bread and potato salad. In the center of the table was a large pot, steaming and warm. The aroma wafting from it was incredibly appetizing. Ken had mentioned that his parents loved beef stew, so we decided it would be a perfect dish to prepare for the celebration, knowing it would make them happy. Please have a seat. Even when I guided her to sit down, Martha didn't take a seat. Instead, she quietly approached the table, and before I knew it, she grabbed the pot in the center with both hands. Wait, Martha? I froze, unsure of what she was about to do. Looking back, I should have realized sooner, but I let my guard down.
There's no way I'm eating anything you cook, always making this trash.
Martha carried the pot to the kitchen. Then, she emptied the entire pot of freshly prepared beef stew into the sink. Chunks of meat, onions, and potatoes slammed into the sink, becoming a mushy mess. No! I couldn't help but raise my voice. What are you doing, Martha?
What do you think? I'm throwing out garbage. I came here to celebrate with my son and granddaughter, not to eat the trash you made.
But you didn't even taste it. How can you know what it tastes like? Stop calling it trash for no reason.
Shut up. There's no way I'd eat this. I'd rather eat livestock feed than your cooking.
Martha shrieked in a high-pitched voice.
Oh my God.
Nearby, I heard Jessica gasp. When I turned around, I saw Jessica standing still behind the kitchen counter. I wasn't the one who made that beef stew. As the stew disappeared down the sink, I looked straight at Martha and said in a firm voice,
What do you mean? Are you saying it was takeout? Were you planning to just order food instead of cooking for your guests?
Still holding the now empty pot, Martha stared at me with a blank expression. As her tone became harsher, accusing me of relying on takeout, the tension between us grew worse. But Jessica ran over, breaking through the tense atmosphere.
You threw away the beef stew? Why would you do that?
With a tearful voice, Jessica ran toward us, pleading.
Grandma, was it you who threw it away?
Why? Why? Jessica kept repeating, tears streaming down her face as she sobbed uncontrollably, seemingly in a state of panic.
I worked so hard to make it. I cut all the meat and vegetables, cooked, simmered, and seasoned everything by myself. I did such a good job, and I wanted Grandma and Grandpa to eat it.
Wait, are you saying Jessica really made this?
Yes. I wanted to surprise everyone, so I kept it a secret until we all said grace.
As she said this, Jessica burst into tears, crying loudly. It was clear she was overwhelmed with sadness and frustration over her ruined dish and the shock of having her beloved grandmother be the one to destroy it. How devastating that must have been. I immediately ran to Jessica, held her tightly, and gently stroked her head. That beef stew was made entirely by my daughter. Of course, I had supervised her every step of the way, ensuring she wouldn't hurt herself, but as she said, she truly did every part of the process on her own. She had tasted it multiple times, and I had confirmed that it was perfectly fine. She had been so excited, looking forward to surprising her grandparents with it. And yet, Martha had ruined it all. This was a secret between Jessica and me. Even Ken didn't know about it either. The plan had been to surprise everyone after we all sat down at the table. Martha, in a panic, tried to approach Jessica.
No, Jessica, that's not what happened. I didn't throw it away. I just wanted to help, and I made a mistake.
That's a lie. I heard you say I wouldn't eat this trash.
You must have misheard, sweetheart. Grandma's getting old, and my hands aren't steady anymore. I slipped, and the pot fell. I'm so sorry.
Liar. I hate you, Grandma.
Martha's face turned pale. Her hands started to tremble uncontrollably. I didn't know what she was going to do next, and I felt afraid. All I could hope for was that she wouldn't hurt Jessica any further.
What? This is all your fault.
Martha slammed the pot she was holding against the sink and grabbed the collar of my shirt as I held Jessica in my arms.
You should have told me from the start that Jessica made the food. It's your fault. Unlike your trash, I would have happily eaten Jessica's cooking.
First, apologize to Jessica. And besides, even if I had made it, That doesn't give you the right to throw it away. Martha, you haven't changed at all since then.
Don't you dare lecture me like you're superior, you lowly daughter-in-law.
Still seated, I felt my shirt tightening around my neck as she pulled harder, making it difficult to breathe. Watching this, Jessica, her face pale with fear, grabbed Martha's arm.
Grandma, stop. You're going to hurt Mommy.
I've never liked you from the start. Young, spoiled, and getting away with everything just because of your age. And then you have the audacity to marry my son. How dare you be so full of yourself?
Not fully understanding what she was saying, I struggled to free myself from Martha's grip. Fortunately, Martha's grip was weak, and I was just about to pry her hands off when it happened.
I've been so bitter about not being able to stop the marriage. That's why I've always wished you'd just get divorced. I figured, since you seemed so spineless, a little harassment would have you running away with your tail between your legs.
Jessica gasped at Martha's words.
Wait, does that mean Grandma has been mean to Mommy this whole time?
I felt like I was about to cry. Not because of Martha's words. It was because, of all things, my daughter Jessica had found out about everything that had happened. Jessica is only 10 years old. Jessica didn't need to know yet that her kind grandma wasn't who she thought she was. At that moment, I heard the sound of a door opening from another room. Hearing the commotion, Ken and George rushed into the living dining room.
What's going on? It's so noisy.
I heard Jessica shouting, "What's happening?"
Unaware of what had transpired, the two of them stood frozen, stunned at the mess in the kitchen. At that moment, Martha, now panicked, let go of my collar, freeing me from a situation where I could barely breathe. I gasped for air, coughing uncontrollably.
Daddy. Grandpa.
Jessica ran to them, seeking help.
Today, I made beef stew all by myself. But before we could even eat it, Grandma threw it all away.
What?
Ken's eyes widened in disbelief.
Grandma has done things like this before. She's been mean to Mommy, and she wanted you and Mommy to get divorced, so...
Even though she was overwhelmed, Jessica tried her best to explain. Ken's face turned pale, while George's face flushed red with anger.
Is this true?
George shouted loudly.
No, that's not it. Emma was carrying the stew and accidentally spilled it, and now she's blaming me.
So are you saying both Emma and Jessica are lying?
Perhaps unable to respond immediately to George's firm tone, Martha quickly shifted her gaze to Jessica.
Grandma threw it away. I saw her do it.
Ken gently embraced Jessica as she broke down in tears.
Jessica, that must have been so hard for you. I'm so sorry.
Ken softly stroked Jessica's back several times, trying to comfort her.
Throwing away food is something you should never do. It's incredibly disrespectful to the person who made it and to the farmers who worked hard to grow the vegetables and raise the livestock. Plus, every vegetable and every piece of meat represents a life, and we must never treat that carelessly.
Yeah, we learned that at school.
That's right. What Grandma did was something you should never do.
Ken gently explained to Jessica. Having recently learned about food distribution and farming in her social studies, Jessica seemed to understand and nodded firmly.
And
Ken now turned his gaze toward Martha, who stood motionless, her head hanging low.
throwing away food Emma made in the past. Was that why, during that one dinner you came over, all the food was yours instead of hers?
When was that? I don't remember doing anything so awful.
Martha responded in a frail voice. but her eyes darted nervously around and her voice trembled noticeably.
And what about the other mean things you've done?
Amma is just trying to frame me. I've never done anything like that, but she acts as if I've treated her horribly.
At Martha's words, Ken frowned deeply. His sharp gaze shifted toward me, and I let out a sigh. I unlocked my phone, played a recording, and handed it to Ken. It was an audio recording of Martha's harassment, something I had started keeping in case a full-blown confrontation ever happened. As Ken's face grew redder and his hands trembled with anger, Martha turned pale and began to shake.
Mom, I'm sorry, but anyone who hurts my family, even you, is not welcome in this house.
Ken spoke firmly, picking up Martha's belongings and attempting to hand them to her. It was clear he intended to make her leave right now.
What? Stop this. I only did it because I was thinking of you.
And how exactly does throwing away food help me?
I was worried, I thought. I thought Ken would marry a well-raised girl who didn't need to attend cooking classes, someone who was properly taught at home.
I've been cooking at home since I was in elementary school. I cut off Martha's excuses. I've loved cooking since I was a child, and I was responsible for meals in my family for as long as I can remember. By middle school, I could prepare a variety of standard home-cooked meals, and I've continued to cook for family and friends ever since. The cooking classes were just for improving my skills further.
That's right. Emma is a fantastic cook and an amazing wife. And now Jessica loves cooking too. But despite all of that, you've completely destroyed the harmony of my family.
Destroyed? How dare you say that? Are you really going to take her side and blame your own mother?
Martha cried, clutching Ken with tear-filled eyes. At that moment, George stepped in to stop her.
That's enough.
George took Martha's belongings from Ken and handed them back to her once again.
I've been with you for so many years, but I never thought you were capable of such terrible behavior. And to think you were doing it so cleverly, trying to keep it hidden from me.
Dear.
I don't want to be called dear by you anymore. After putting so much pressure on everyone about wanting grandchildren, you went and deeply hurt our grandchild. You also hurt the wife my son cherishes. I have no intention of spending the rest of my life with someone of such character.
Does that mean?
I'm considering a divorce. We'll have a proper discussion when we get home.
Let's talk it through. Yes, that's it. If we talk, you'll understand. This is all a misunderstanding. Surely, you can understand the worry a parent feels for their married child's household.
Ken is an adult now. It's not our place to interfere anymore. He's doing fine, living a happy life. All he needs is for you to stop meddling.
With George's unforgiving words, Martha began to sob quietly, taking the bag handed to her and slowly making her way toward the front door.
Mom, one more thing.
Ken's voice followed her retreating figure.
I can no longer consider someone who has hurt my wife and daughter so deeply as my parent.
It was a declaration of estrangement.
Ken, even you? What are you saying?
You've always claimed it was for my sake, but hurting my wife is the same as hurting me. And you knew that, didn't you? That's why you hid it from me.
If only Emma had just left on her own.
It's far too late for that now. And making Jessica cry today is something I will never forgive. From this day forward, we're cutting ties, Mom.
No.
Martha's pitiful sobs were the only sound as George led her out of our house. Afterward, Ken and I did our best to comfort our sobbing daughter, explaining gently that her grandmother would no longer be coming to our home. We promised her, "Let's make the beef stew again, and this time, the three of us will enjoy it together." Will the wound in Jessica's heart ever heal? Perhaps it might never completely fade. Even so, we desperately hoped she wouldn't grow to hate this home, that she wouldn't grow to hate cooking. That was our heartfelt wish as a couple. A few weeks later.
That was delicious. Thank you for the meal.
Tonight's dinner was roast beef, made together by my Jessica and me. The sides included salad and onion soup. Of course, the soup was homemade. We left no vegetables uneaten, finishing everything on our plates. George and Martha got divorced shortly after, and it seems Martha was kicked out of the house just days later. Since my family still keeps in touch with George, we heard the details directly from him. After 40 years of marriage, they went through a so-called gray divorce. I thought it would turn into a big fight, but George, who was utterly fed up with Martha's behavior, took full control of the situation, and the process went quickly. Apparently, there was a division of assets, but Martha didn't receive much money. George kept the house and the car, so Martha had to take the cash. But she didn't get much since Martha had a habit of spending excessively, leaving little in savings. When the money was divided according to the law, it wasn't enough for Martha to live a carefree life for the rest of her years. It seems the money was just enough to cover the moving costs for her new place and some living expenses for a while. During that time, Martha, who had previously bragged to the neighbors about her grandchild's birth, now gained a bad reputation for throwing away the meal her grandchild had prepared for a special occasion. Naturally, the community's attitude toward her became harsher, forcing her to move to a faraway place. After cutting ties with Martha, it seemed like peace had finally returned to their lives. Then it happened. One evening, something unexpected occurred.
On my way home, I ran into Grandma.
Jessica, who had just come back from school, said this with a frightened look on her face. When we asked for more details, it turned out that Martha had apparently been waiting to ambush her after school and suddenly started talking to her.
I'm really sorry about back then. I never meant to hurt you, Jessica. Please, can you forgive me?
She begged for forgiveness and even pleaded with Jessica.
Grandma doesn't have any money after the divorce, and I'm really struggling right now. I'll apologize to you and Emma. Please, can you help me?
Fortunately, Jessica stood her ground and managed to get out of the situation.
I need to talk to Dad and Mom first before I can decide.
Once Jessica started running, there was no way Martha, who was well into her 60s, could catch up to her. I can't believe Grandma would do something like that. You did great standing up to her. Jessica nodded, but her face was clearly filled with worry. Martha had only received the bare minimum for living expenses during the divorce. Without finding a job or lowering her standard of living, it seems her money ran out in no time. Still, instead of desperately looking for work or turning to government assistance, she had the audacity to come to our family for help after everything she'd done to us. And to top it off, she ambushed her grandchild just to plead for support. Her actions showed a complete lack of decency, and we couldn't help but feel a sense of fear. Honestly, it was disgusting. Ken seemed to take the matter seriously as well.
Actually, she reached out to me before, asking for money.
Really?
I flatly refused and cut off all contact, but I never thought she'd go to Jessica. Honestly, what kind of person does that? It might be my fault that Jessica had to go through this. I'm so sorry.
With a bitter expression, Ken apologized to Jessica, but Jessica shook her head with a reassuring smile, as if to cheer him up.
No, it's okay.
In front of us was a plate of fried chicken that Jessica and I had made together. After thinking for a moment, Ken spoke decisively.
We can't let her keep bothering us, especially Jessica. I know it'll be tough for you both, but we need to move.
I nodded in agreement. Jessica said she'd be sad to leave her school friends behind, but the traumatic beef stew incident must have left a deep scar. Jessica agreed to keep in touch with her close friends through emails and letters. When we contacted George to discuss the move and other matters, he told us that Martha had also been asking him for money.
Right after the divorce, she kept calling me nonstop, saying she had no money. I thought it was understandable since we split the already small savings, but it seems she spent the money at high-end restaurants. I can't feel any sympathy for her. I expected she might contact Ken, but to think she went after Jessica, I'm truly sorry.
George apologized to us. No, please don't worry about it. You must have had a tough time too, George. As we continued discussing the situation, our family decided to live with George. We quickly found a new place and moved without delay. The longer we stayed, the higher the risk of running into Martha. Because of Ken's commute, we moved to a neighboring state, but it was far enough that Martha wouldn't likely follow us. Once the move was complete and Jessica had settled into her new elementary school, George shared some news.
I heard from someone near the old house that she's now living almost like a homeless person. They saw her wearing tattered clothes, standing in line for a community meal.
George showed us a photo on his phone as he spoke. I wondered what kind of fate awaited her now. It was hard not to feel some pity, but when considering all she had done, it was clear she had brought this on herself. See, food is precious. Throwing away a meal someone prepared is something you should never do. While Martha struggled to find food, our family sat down at a table full of homemade dishes. Today was George's birthday. The main dish was beef stew, the same one that couldn't be enjoyed back then. Of course, Jessica made it. Time had passed since that incident, and Jessica had honed her cooking skills so much that she could now handle almost everything perfectly on her own. The stew simmered in a big pot, filled with tender meat, onions, carrots, and potatoes. Everything looked like it had soaked up the flavor beautifully. The rising steam carried a delicious aroma that made our mouths water.
Happy birthday, Grandpa!
Jessica clapped her hands with a big smile.
Thank you. I'm so happy to finally get to eat your beef stew.
George said this, his tearful eyes narrowing with emotion. He was surely remembering that day.
It turned out great. Please try it.
Jessica enthusiastically encouraged George to taste the stew. The side dishes were also masterpieces we were proud of. Ken and I took our seats, saying to each other, "This is going to be great." Together, we all said, "Let's eat." The beef stew was absolutely delicious. Every ingredient was tender, flavorful, and easy to eat. The seasoning was just right, and the aroma was delightful. For something made by an elementary school student, it was incredibly well done, even with some guidance from me.
This is amazing. Jessica, you're a genius. It's so delicious.
George said, moved by the taste, pulling Jessica into a joyful hug.
Well, Emma taught her with a lot of enthusiasm.
Ken teased, making me smile. Oh, stop it. Jessica took an interest in cooking all on her own and worked hard to get here. And so our happy meal began. Delicious food, a loving family. The room was filled with laughter and warmth. We promised ourselves to always cherish and protect this happiness.